o'clock. Welcome to the Audit and Governance Committee meeting today. This is the last meeting of this municipal year. My name is Councillor Hilary Mitchell and I'm the chair of this committee, and I am joined today by my deputy chair, Councillor Les Shaw, and Councillor Graham Stokes. We're also joined by our officer colleagues, Gillian Marshall, Chief Legal Officer, Jason Brooke, Service Manager, Internal Audit and Risk, Julie Cousins, Principal Audit Manager, Rob Blair, Corporate Counter Fraud Manager, Neil Warren, Chief Finance Officer, Colette Tyrrell, Group Finance Manager, Mark Tolson, Governance Manager, Simon Field, Service Manager, Corporate Procurement, and Bradley Frost, Corporate Risk Manager. We also have Helen Taylor and Nicola Wright from Deloitte with us today. I hope I haven't left anybody out. Okay, so we get started. I don't have any remarks. There are no items of urgency. Members' declaration of interest is the usual thing. You know the system by now. If you do find you have to make declare an interest, please complete the usual yellow form. We will be excluding the public and press for some item under agenda item 15, Appendix D, should you wish to discuss it. So now if we go straight on to item 6, to approve as a correct record the minutes of the Audit and Governance Committee meeting held on the 1st of March. We do have one comment about the minutes, but it's not an accuracy matter, I don't think. No, right, for accuracy, could somebody move the minutes, please?
Move the minutes, Chair.
Thank you. And any seconded?
Second the minutes, Chair.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you, Graham. Matters arising on the minutes as a comment from our independent member, unfortunately can't be here today because of internet problems. It's asking for the last full paragraph, page 2 of the minutes. No contact by the risk manager to review this risk. Anybody like to say anything on that?
Yeah. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. That action was against myself. The reason that hasn't happened as yet is because the risks were not going to be represented at this meeting. They will be presented at a future meeting. So I thought it would be more timely that I would discuss this specific risk with the independent member at a point when the risks were being reviewed in advance of presenting back to this committee at a later date.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
So happy we go on to the next meeting, Audit and Governance Committee, annual report. That's on pages 9 to 26, and that's be presented to us by Gillian.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm presenting this today, although Mark Tolson, who is also on the call, has prepared the report. So members will recall that you do an annual report, and if you approve the report that's appended today, it will go to Council in June, and to do so is in accordance with SIP for good practice, so that full Council is aware of the work of this committee and the breadth of the matters that you have looked at during each municipal year, and the level of assurance that you have found. Agenda page 10, the report there pulls out some of the key achievements of the committee through the year, and that refers to the draft report that you have and the detail that sits behind agenda page 10. You will see at agendas page 19 through to 22, but in summary it covers the internal and the external audit work that you have reviewed, your programme of assurance reports, your contribution to the accounts, the risk reviews that you've undertaken, and the report that you took on how well the internal control environment had stood up during the pandemic response. Ultimately, the report concludes that you've had a very successful year as a committee despite the pandemic and the challenges that were thrown up, including virtual meetings and short notice decision making that needed to happen, and that the internal control environment across all of those things has also functioned well. The recommendation is to approve the report, as I say, and it will go to Council in June if you do so, though if you wish to make any amendments to it, then we can do those. I'll leave it there, Chair, but happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Gillian. Are there any questions on this report?
Comment, Chair.
Okay, thanks. Yes, go ahead, Les.
I think on page 23, I think Gillian's just touched on it. On page 23, item 7, the conclusion, I think that says it all, that even during one of the most trying 12 months that I think anybody's gone through, I think those two paragraphs in the last sentence say it all. So I certainly recommend the report.
Thank you, Les. Mr. I do too. So we agree that we accept the report, the report's recommendations.
Agreed?
Thank you. Yeah. The next item is the annual audit plan on pages 27 to 49, and that will be presented by Jason or Julie. Is it Julie?
Yes, Chair, I'm happy to take that agenda item. Good morning, members. My name's Julie Cousins. I'm the Principal Audit Manager, and I'm pleased to present the draft internal audit plan to you today that you will find on agenda page 27 of your packs. So the purpose of the report today is to share with you our proposed audit plan for 21-22 for your comment and approval. We also seek approval to remove some low priority audits, which are detailed at paragraph 2.19 of Appendix B. As the report is quite lengthy, I'm proposing to cover the key points here, and then I'm happy to take any questions at the end. So in terms of our professional requirements, we are required by public sector internal audit standards to set a risk-based audit plan to determine the priority of the audit activity. As part of our planning process, we capture the views of all stakeholders to ensure that the plan provides assurance that the strategic and operational risks of the council are being managed effectively and that resources are utilised effectively and efficiently in the provision of council services. We are also required to provide independent and objective assurance on the overall adequacy and effectiveness of the organisation's framework of governance, risk management and internal control. And in our opinion, the internal audit plan proposed today gives the necessary breadth and depth of coverage to enable an audit opinion to be given in the summer of 2022. The plan is balanced with the resources that we have available within the team, which are detailed at paragraph 4.5 on agenda page 28. Members will note that in paragraph 4.7, we have detailed the vacant posts that we have currently within the team. And our plan has been based on the assumption that these will be filled by the 1st of September 2021. As this is an assumption, we will continue to keep this committee updated on progress towards filling those posts through our usual update reports. Before we consider the plan in detail, I wanted to share with you the methodology that we've used in developing the plan. This is laid out in Appendix B at page 44 of the agenda pack, and I'll take you through the key points. As detailed in the report, there is no specific formula for setting an internal audit plan. The key requirements are that it covers the risk profile and the risk appetite of the council and its structure and the needs of key stakeholders such as this committee. Therefore, in setting this plan, we have engaged with directorates, and the way that we've done this year is we've had discussions which are based on risk heat maps, which have covered all corporate risks, all strategic risks, and all operational risks, which were rated either high or very high. This has prompted requests for audit coverage in certain areas, but it has given us a focused coverage in each specific directorate. We've engaged with key stakeholders, such as the chair and vice chair of this committee, the chief executive of the council, the section 151 officer and the monitoring officer. We also have to be mindful of any audits which require a follow-up in the year, and we've also taken account of compulsory work such as the certification of grant funding, which we have to undertake each year. And we have accommodated and responded to the needs of key stakeholders in the plan proposed today. As detailed in paragraph 2.5 on page 46, in setting the audit plan, we need to maintain a level of contingency to enable the team to respond to emerging areas of risk. And this has become ever more important as we emerge from the pandemic. As such, we have set a more generous contingency in the form of unplanned audit days this year to allow us to do this effectively. During our engagement process, we received a greater number of requests than we could accommodate. Therefore, we prioritised these requests by high, medium and low, and all those ranked high have been included in the plan. Those ranked medium and low are being held on a reserve list, which we will keep under constant review during the year, bringing the audits forward into the plan, using the contingency time as appropriate. And this should allow us to be more flexible in our audit planning process this year, which we feel meets the needs of the Council during these challenging times. There has been a period of review and challenge on the plan, and it has been shared with our external audit colleagues, Chief Executive, and we have had briefing sessions with Chair and Vice Chair and within our own team. There are a number of audits detailed at paragraph 2.19, which are low priority, and we believe we can remove from the plan without affecting the professional requirement to provide our internal audit opinion, and we seek committee's approval to allow those audits to be removed. The draft plan itself is proposed in detailed in Appendix A of the report, detailed at agenda page 35. Members will see that each audit is linked to the Wakefield Way principles, the Council's priorities and the relevant risk from the current risk register. And this ensures that we are clear about the purpose of each audit engagement and how it links to the Council's strategic direction to ensure that our audit work adds value. The plan itself is split into distinct areas, and I'll just go through those briefly. So the key financial systems work. There are some key financial systems we audit every year, such as payroll and council tax, and some which we audit on a cyclical basis. And particular areas to note this year is a focus on taxation, particularly value-added tax, and also a review of the Treasury management function. As I mentioned earlier, we have a lot of grant work to do, and there is a significant number of new funding streams this year which we need to certify, and those have been accommodated in the plan. We then undertake cross-cutting work. So this is work that cuts across the entire council. So a couple of examples are a review of the safer recruitment of staff and agency workers. So here we would look across the council and then probably focus our testing on specific areas, such as those where staff are working with vulnerable people. We're required to do a piece of work on value for money, and this year we've decided, or we propose, to cover a review of the performance indicators to ascertain whether value for money is being achieved and demonstrated in a specific area of PIs. And we've also got a cross-cutting piece of work on the Council's response to COVID-19. In terms of Directorate risks, each Directorate has specific audits planned to reflect their individual needs and risk profile. We've also included some time to undertake a number of schools audits. And as discussed, we have some contingency time as well to reflect new and emerging risks. And naturally, we do have some ongoing work that we are still working on that has been accommodated in this plan. Under professional requirements, we must notify this committee of any resourcing issues when setting the draft internal audit plan. Based on the process described, there are 1,058 available audit days, a shortage of 290 days if the plan was to incorporate all requested work. In conclusion, the prioritisation process that we've completed has enabled a risk-based audit plan to be set for 21-22, and this will enable a risk-based internal audit assurance opinion to be provided for the 21-22 financial year. Therefore, there are no additional resources required further to those that have already been factored into the planning process. If the plan is approved by committee today, each corporate director will be informed of the final audit plan for their specific directorate. So I'll leave it there, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Julie. Are there any questions on this report?
I've just got one question, Julie, if that's all right, Chair.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, the biggest issue for me is around, and you've covered it extensively, is around resources. Yes. If you actually look at the resources, I think probably a lot of other councils are having the same sort of issues, finding experienced people to fill some of these resources. I see you've covered it by, and I'm quite happy with the fact that you've prioritised some of the main issues. The only problem is going forward, when you prioritise things, other things start to become priorities as well. I welcome some of the initiatives that you're having to bring in new people, but I just wondered where you were with sort of an apprentice style, where we bring people in and train them internally, because I see that probably one of the biggest issues around this internal audit plan. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Yes, we currently have two what we call career grade auditors, which are auditors that are at a lower grade within the team and that are currently studying and developing as they work with us, so they're getting work experience and studying at the same time, and that, I suppose, is our way of building our own future and succession planning. So we've got those two key posts filled, and the individuals within those posts are doing extremely well. But yeah, your point about a specific apprentice is something that we have definitely considered and we've discussed with the management team, and we are open to. So yeah, that's definitely something that we would look to develop in the future. Unless Jason wants to add anything there. No, he's nothing further to add. Okay, that's fine. Yes, does that answer your question, Councillor Shaw?
Yes, it does. Thanks, Julie.
Okay, no worries. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we're happy to accept this report. Thank you very much, Julie. I know an awful lot of work has gone into it.
Thank you, Chair.
All right. The next item is the introduction to the counter fraud arrangements year-end report, pages 51 to 61, and that has been introduced, I believe, by Rob Blair.
It is. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members.
Good morning.
Thank you, Chair. So this is my report I'm going to present to you this morning. The purpose of which is twofold. And as Chair said, it's in your packs, page 51 through to 61. So the purpose is twofold. Firstly, to report to members with an update of the work undertaken within the counter fraud team for the last financial year, April 20 to March 21, and also offers opportunities for members to comment on the planned work within counter fraud for 21-22. In point 2, the committee is asked to note the contents and provide comment on the work undertaken and the work planned for the forthcoming year. So in point 3 on page 51, means for the district. What does it mean for the district? So robust counter fraud arrangements ensure that the council's business is conducted in accordance with the law and that public money is safeguarded and properly accounted for and used in delivery of agreed priorities. Highlighted in 3.2. So this is following the implementation of the counter fraud strategy at the half-yearly report in November, along with the contents of today's report, which will, if agreed, will help ensure that the council minimises the amount of money lost to fraud and corruption and protect the public purse. So in point 4 on page 52, highlights the types of fraud that the council faces: money laundering, fraud and corruption, bribery. Also highlights our suite of counter fraud policies, the role of management and the role of this committee, along with the role of the internal audit, risk and counter fraud teams, which is highlighted in a table summarised on page 55, 4.19. Touching more specifically in point 5, it covers work undertaken by the counter fraud team in relation to COVID-19 fraud, specifically the various business grant schemes that have been available to assist local businesses throughout the pandemic. So in 5.1 on page 55, highlights that the council has paid out approximately £109 million in business grants administered by our business and transactional services team to assist approximately 7,700 local businesses throughout the pandemic. 5.2, central government guidance requires local authorities to complete a fraud and risk assessment for each of the business grant schemes in order to clarify and highlight what actions and checks have been undertaken to minimise the risk of fraud and or error. And in 5.3, the same guidance requires local authorities to provide a monthly report to highlight the pre and post payment assurance exercises that it's undertaken. So in 5.4, I just wanted to highlight some of the prepayment checks. This is on page 56 of your packs. So as previously reported to this committee, the council acquired the use of software called Spotlight ahead of the initial grants paid in March and April of last year. So this linked applications for grants to Companies House and HMRC records. In addition to these initial checks, we've undertaken further prepayment assurance checks through the NFI website linked to Experian records on further grant applications, specifically related to additional restriction grants and local restriction support grants. And a lot of that data came through the second lockdown stage, I think it was, in October, November last year. So we are undertaking some further prepayment assurance checks linked to a new grant scheme recently made available to taxi license holders. So that's work we're ongoing with at the moment. With regards to post-payment assurance checks, the council has provided all its data on grants paid again to the NFI as part of matched exercise to Companies House and Experian records. And that this is part of a national post-payment assurance exercise. And we're expecting these findings hopefully at the end of April, which will back to this committee at a later date. Okay, in 5.6 in your packs, that's page number 56 again. So this alludes to the fraud alerts and scams that we've received throughout the pandemic. So we'll continue to receive these alerts from CIFAS, NAFN and Fraud Advisory Panel, along with our counterparts across the district. So these are of emerging fraud threats that may affect citizens, the council and private and public sectors. So we've alerted which have alerted us to potential fraudulent claims to the schemes, and also we've shared this information with citizens when needed. 5.8 highlights the work that we've done with our counterparts across the district, sharing best practice, local knowledge with regards to local and national alerts. Okay, 5.9 on page 57. So we work closely with our colleagues in the business and transactional services teams who've done a tremendous job, in my opinion, in administering the grants and paying the grants. And we've also done a lot of work with colleagues in our business rates team to minimise the fraud risk to the various schemes. So in point 6 covers the national, sorry, going back to 5.10 on page 57. So where false applications to the scheme are highlighted, these will come to us to be investigated rigorously, including the recovery of any monies. So in comparison, in 5.11 on 57 to our neighbouring authorities, Wakefield has a relatively low number of fraudulent or potentially fraudulent claims that have been highlighted at the moment, which is reassuring. In 5.12, it's important to also highlight that the team has also assisted with initiatives to ensure that businesses who are eligible for grants have claimed. So we visited premises and contacted business owners to encourage take-up to the schemes to assist throughout the pandemic. Moving on to the National Fraud Initiative on point 6 on page 57 of your packs. So this is the biennial exercise, which at the moment we're currently in the middle of. So we provided our data to NFI in relation to the exercise back in October 20. And following this, we've received the initial matches that require further scrutiny. They were received at the beginning of February, and further matches are due by the end of this month also. So we've coordinated the training of staff to conduct the initial checks of the data matches, and we'll continue to coordinate and review the work undertaken and report back to this committee throughout 21-22. Moving on to point 7, on page 57, which covers the counter-fraud policies and the suite of counter-fraud policies that we have. So in line with the counter-fraud strategy agreed by this committee, the team will continue to undertake a review of these policies throughout the coming year. 7.2 highlights the work we've already started on the anti-fraud and corruption policy and the anti-money laundering policy. So they're currently under review. We'll consult with trade unions once completed, and we'll feed back to this committee for approval at a later date. Point 8 on page 58, counter-fraud awareness. So the team is committed to promoting a positive counter-fraud culture within the council. This has included training new employees and apprentices, which has recently been completed, to raise awareness of our suite of policies and the work that we undertake as a counter-fraud team within the council. In addition to this, it's important to highlight the responsibilities that employees have to maintain a high standard of conduct, to work diligently, in line with protecting the public purse, and report any suspected instances of fraud in a timely manner. We will continue to promote and raise awareness of all our policies going forward. Point 9, whistleblowing. So the ownership of the whistleblowing policy has recently been transferred from our human resources partners across to the counter-fraud team. 9.2 on page 58 states that we'll review and update the policy throughout the coming year and report back to this committee for approval. And again, we'll do a lot of work to raise awareness and promote the new policy as part of the counter-fraud strategy. 9.3, the team will report going forward the amount of whistleblowing referrals made and their outcomes to this committee in coming years. So in 2020-21, a total of 8 whistleblowing allegations were received. 5 of those investigations and fact findings are ongoing. Of the 3 cases closed, 2 were upheld and 1 disproved. Point 10 on page 58 highlights some of the work that's planned for 2021-22. In 10.1, it just highlights that obviously with the pandemic, some of the planned proactive work schedule for last year was restricted, and unfortunately joint working with DWP was disengaged throughout the pandemic. The light at the end of the tunnel is with the prospect of lockdown restrictions being eased. Our plan is to re-engage our partnership with DWP, undertaking joint investigations, conducting interviews under caution in a COVID-safe environment. These may well include virtual interviews under caution, where the customer and legal representative will be in one room, and we will be video linked in another room, right, a COVID-safe environment. In 10.3, the plan is to undertake more proactive work linked to business grants investigations, as we touched on. Blue badge misuse, which is still a big problem within the area, and investigations linked into findings from the NFI exercise, which I touched on earlier also. In 10.4, the team will aim to recruit a vacancy we have as a counter-fraud support officer role, which is vacant at the moment, which will offer us opportunity to work more proactive in the future. The plan is to undertake that recruitment certainly towards the end of spring, beginning of summer, and also the plan will be to offer, much in line with the comments of Councillor Shaw, a counter-fraud apprenticeship along with that post, which is obviously consistent with our internal audit team. Moving on to 10.5 on page 59 of your packs. So we'll continue to promote the counter-fraud culture within Wakefield Council by reviewing and promoting the suite of policies and procedures, and by undertaking awareness sessions and canvassing staff opinion in relation to the policies that we have. So in conclusion, it's my opinion that the council offers a robust counter-fraud arrangements which are in place. We'll continue to undertake and enhance the arrangements as part of the delivery of the counter fraud strategy 2020-23. 11.2. This conclusion has been reached by benchmarking the council's counter fraud policies against those of our neighbouring authorities and good practice that we share. The policies will be continued to be reviewed as we've stated. In 11.3, our staff and the investigations are undertaken by competent, highly experienced staff who hold accredited counter fraud qualifications. And finally, 11.4, the counter fraud team is an active member, as we've touched upon, of the Western South Yorkshire Fraud Investigation Group. The group meets regularly to share best practice, and we're also in kind of contact on a weekly basis to share fraud alerts, scams, and just gauge experience of the group. Specifically, obviously, it's been quite prevalent with regards to COVID-19 scams and frauds that have come up in the last year. But the group has a wealth of experience and knowledge and is highly effective in counter fraud, highly effective counter fraud networking. So finally, recommendation from me is that the committee is asked to note the comments of the report and provide comment on activities undertaken in the last year and planned work for the coming year. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you very much, Rob. There is one comment from John Morrison, and it says, useful report, but why no summary included of number of allegations of fraud and suspected fraud for the year? I think that would be useful.
Yeah, I mean, going forward, Chair, I think it's a valid point. I think that the problem this year has been that the comparator to previous years has been very, very few. Obviously, we've had a lot of work to do with COVID and the business grant schemes, but the comparison onto previous years, where we've literally had hundreds and hundreds of investigations linked in with Blue Badge, linked in with DWP, linked in with other investigations, has not been, so we won't be comparing like for like. So going forward with the planned work we've got, proactive work we've got for next year, then all investigations will be fed back to this committee. So it's a bit of a year out of the kind of ordinary, where we didn't feel, I didn't feel that a summary of all investigations undertaken would be as relevant as it has been on previous years. But I do take the point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And also I might add, I endorse the statement about the business team. I think they've been absolutely fantastic, the way they've administered everything. Are there any further questions or comments? No. So I take it then that we accept the recommendations of the report.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, yeah, we do. Next item on agenda, page 63, introduction to the statement of accounts and financial reporting arrangements. And this, so I have to ask, who's doing this? Is you, Colette?
Yes, that's me. Thank you. Good morning. I'm Colette Tyrrell, Group Finance Manager responsible for financial accounting, capital and treasury management. The report that's on the agenda this morning is to provide members with information on the timetable for preparing the 2021 statutory statement of accounts, and also to update members of any changes to the accounting standards. So the Accounts and Audit Regulations 2015 sets out the requirements for the production and the publication of the annual statement of accounts. The regulations have been amended in 2021 in recognition of the ongoing impact of the pandemic, as well as additional requirements for the external auditor coming from the new Code of Audit Practice 2021. So the statutory deadlines have been amended. So this year the requirement is that the draft is to be published by the end of July and made available for public inspection. And if this isn't achieved, we are required as local authorities to put a notice on the website saying that this is a new requirement. We've not had that before. and the audited accounts are to be published by the 30th of September. So this is a change from, well, 2 years ago before the pandemic. I think the requirement was for the draft accounts to be made available at the end of May and the audited accounts to be completed by the end of July. So internally, we've considered the regulation and also our own resources. And so, and we propose to, as in paragraph 5.8, we propose to complete the draft accounts by the end of May, so that they'll be available for Deloitte to start the audit in June. And also the audit accounts will be submitted to Audit and Governance Committee by the end of September for approval. And that's it. Oh, and there are no changes to accounting standards that impact on Wakefield Council in 2021. Any questions?
Hey, thank you very much, Colette. Are there any questions on this report? No, doesn't appear so. And we're happy then, I take it, to accept the recommendations of this report. Yes. Okay, next item on agenda page 67 is the planning report for the year ending external audit planning report 2020-21. Will that be Nicola or Helen?
Hello everybody, it's Nicola here, but we'll be doing a bit of a double act if that's okay in presenting the report. So thank you very much and good morning. So what we are going to assume is that you've had an opportunity to look at the plan already, and what we were just going to do is highlight some of the key things that we thought were relevant just to make sure that you were aware of. So we were going to start on page 79, which is the timetable. Now, actually, Colette's already covered this, I think, in terms of the detail, but it was just to make the committee aware that clearly the timetable moved quite significantly last year because of the impact of COVID, and it has moved again this year, so we're not back to where we were originally, but we are hoping to be completed a bit earlier than in previous years. So it was just to make the committee aware of that. The next point that we wanted to highlight was the next page, which is page 80, which was just to highlight our approach to materiality. So you'll be aware that when we do our testing on the financial statements, we don't test every single transaction. We have to apply a threshold. So the threshold that we're applying is 2% of gross expenditure. So that is very similar to previous years. It gives us a figure in terms of last year's accounts. We'll update this when we get the draft accounts for 2021, but it gives us a draft materiality figure of 14.5 million. However, we will be reporting to this committee any misstatements that we find that are in excess of 700,000. So even though they'll be much smaller, we'll still be reporting those to the committee. So the next area that we wanted to cover was our detailed risk assessment, just to take you through the risks and the differences from the previous year. So Helen's just going to take us through that, and then I'll come back and just talk to you a little bit about the value for money changes this year. Thanks, Helen.
Thanks, Nicola. Good morning, everyone. Starting on page 85 of the pack, on page 85, we've set out our risk assessment for 2021 and how that differs from our risk assessment last year. So the key points here are that we previously had a significant risk over the classification of capital expenditure. In last year's audit, we've considered this and we didn't find any audit issues in relation to that risk last year, and as such we've concluded that that should no longer apply as a significant risk for 2021. We will still be auditing it to a higher risk level, obviously given the council's level of capital expenditure in the year. So in replacement to that significant risk, we have identified a new significant risk in 2021 on the completeness of accrued expenditure. And that's because there is a lot of judgment involved in determining which period the council's expenditure should fall into. So for that reason, we've identified that as the significant risk for 2021. Just to highlight as well that, as with previous years, we are at this stage planning to rebut the presumed risk of fraud in revenue recognition that auditing standards require us to have. we have requested a paper from the finance team in relation to the new income streams that the council has in relation to COVID-19, and we'll obviously assess that, and should our risk assessment change in that respect, we will let you know. And then just to confirm, on page 88, the second significant risk that we're proposing at this stage is management override, which is the other mandated risk that we have to have under auditing standards. So that is because management are in a position to be able to use their judgment to influence the financial statements, as well as override controls for specific transactions. So we'll test this by understanding the controls around journal entries, which are basically manual entries in the financial statements, and also around key estimates, and then we'll sample test journals that have been posted through the year and do a lot of work around the significant estimates in the financial statements. And then finally, for me, on page 89, the two areas of audit focus this year on property valuation and the valuation of the pension liability. So again, previously, the property valuation has been a significant risk, and members will remember that there was a material uncertainty included in the 1920 valuations, and that will be included in the audit report for 1920, but we understand that material uncertainty requirement around valuations is not going to exist for valuations undertaken in 2021, and for that reason we are proposing to not have this as a significant risk area for the 2021 audit. The valuation of the pension liability, again, it's a very big number in the financial statements, and that there is judgment involved, particularly in setting the assumptions that are used. So we'll audit that to a higher risk level, and we'll do our usual work around the assumptions, involving our experts to review them, and also liaising with the pension fund auditors directly to get assurance from them.
So that's the financial statement risks, and then on page 90 of the pack, we just have a page there around the value for money. Now, you'll be aware from previous years that in our external audit opinion, we do include an opinion usually around value for money, but there has been a change in guidance for the 2021 year. So the audit code has been changed, and we are now required to issue a narrative commentary in the form of an auditor's annual report. So that replaces the annual audit letter, and that is meant to give more context around the work that we've undertaken and any recommendations or weaknesses that we've identified that need to be reported. So what you'll see from us this year is you will see kind of a longer narrative about what we've done, and potentially more information in the public domain around any weaknesses or recommendations that we find. So I believe we've mentioned this to you previously, but it was just to highlight that, as well as the sort of usual approach, you'll see more from us when it comes to the value for money work that we need to do this year. We do set out sort of in the next few pages from 91 onwards some changes in auditing standards. So as Colette said, there aren't changes or significant ones to accounting standards, but there have been some updates to the approach to certain auditing areas. So going concern is less, it's relevant, but it's less relevant in terms of local authorities. But as you'll see from page 92, there are some quite significant changes to how we audit estimates. And estimates are some of the bigger numbers in your accounts, or things like the valuation of property, like your pension liability. So you will see us, I'm sure the finance team will be pleased, doing more work in these areas to respond to these changes to accounting standards. So it was just to make the committee aware that you'll be seeing again a bit more from us there. The final point I just want to mention on the plan before opening to questions is page 100 of the pack, which is just around the audit fee. So as we've mentioned, there are some additional procedures that we'll need to carry out, so around value for money and around auditing standards. So we have scheduled a discussion with the 151 officer and the finance team just to talk about the impact of that on the audit fee. At the moment, we've put that in there as to be confirmed, because clearly we need to have that conversation with you, but also any change to the fee needs to be agreed with the PSEA also. So we will report back to a future committee on those discussions around the impact on the budget. So I'll pause for this and open up to any questions.
Chair, I've got a question.
I think Hillary's muted.
Yeah, Hillary, are you
Yeah,
muted?
I did. I muted myself. My daughter came in and started banging kettles around. She left and I couldn't unmute. So sorry about that. Yeah, I've got a question from Graham.
Yeah, it's around the audit fees on page 100. It seems strange to me that we get past the end of the financial year and yet the audit fees are still to be confirmed. When are we likely to get to know what these are, and how do we assure ourselves that what we're getting is value for money when we don't know what the fees are?
So the reason that the fees are still to be confirmed is largely because there are some new requirements this year. So I just touched on the value for money change and also the increased workload that we'll have around some of the auditing standards. So I think we're sort of cautious that, particularly around the value for money, until we've completed that for the first time, that we're not really sure exactly how much that will be. So the plan, we have a conversation, as I mentioned, scheduled Section 151 officer. The plan is to talk through a range of what we think is a reasonable fee and obviously get feedback on that, and then sort of incorporate that into coming up with our final fee. I think the assurance that you can take from that is clearly we expect to be challenged by the finance team, and we, you know, whenever we look to vary fees, we frequently are. But also, obviously, this contract is arranged through PSAA, so through public sector audit appointments. And our contract is with them. There are hourly fee rates included in that contract, and also any additional fee that we agree with bodies has to be reviewed and approved by PSA also. So they're there to make sure that firms are being consistent and that there's an element of additional challenge in the fees. So there is a process to help make sure that you are getting value for money from that perspective.
Okay, thanks.
Leslie, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I want to go back to this valuation of pension liability. I understand why we'd want to certainly look at the valuation of pension liability, but in reality, the actuaries of the West Yorkshire Pension Scheme are going to be working on this as they do every 3 years and coming up with their valuation. And although it would be good to understand our position. In reality, changing the actuarial position of the West Yorkshire Pension Scheme will be difficult anyway. I just wondered what your view was on that.
Well, what happens normally is that, so obviously the pension fund produces its own financial statements, but an element of the liability sits on your balance sheet. So that is prepared each year by the actuary. So you're right, every 3 years there's the triennial valuation, but then each year that is updated by the actuaries sort of for your share. So as auditors, we look at the share that ends up on your financial statement. So we rely on the work of those auditors, but we go through some procedures just to ensure that that number is clearly accurate. And you might remember from the last couple of years, there have been some issues around the pension liability valuation. So for example, there was the McLeod judgment, which meant that the pension number had to change to take into account some additional liabilities. And then last year there was also Goodwin. So although it's a number that's prepared by the actuaries through the pension fund, it's still important that we as auditors look at that and just make sure that what ends up on your balance sheet as your share is accurate. I would also say that pensions are, when it comes to audit regulation and accounting regulation, pensions are a real focus of the regulator. So it is something that we're pushed quite hard to make sure that we test and challenge substantially.
Yeah, that's fine, and I'm glad that we're pushing and testing that side of it. Thanks for that answer.
Thank you.
Okay, that's it. Thank you very much, Nicola and Helen. And take it, and we're going to accept the recommendations on this report. The next item on the agenda is Item number 12, review of the council's constitution, pages 105 to 111. That's over to you, Gillian.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So we bring the annual review of the Constitution to the committee, and I brought it this year, but the committee will note that the review at this stage is quite high level. So just to be really clear about this, the role of the Audit and Governance Committee is to have a look at the approach that we're taking and the things that we're identifying at this stage as things that do need a review, but things that perhaps don't need a review or only need a light touch review. The ultimate responsibility for satisfying themselves as to any changes and approval of those changes falls to the full council, and that takes place at the annual meeting, which this year is scheduled for the 20th of May. So members might be looking at the table that's appended to this report and thinking, well, we don't have the detail here, and therefore it's difficult for us to comment, and I completely accept that. But we are in that review process at the moment. So what I'm bringing to you at this stage is the overview of the areas that I think need to be looked at, and those are set out in the table from agenda page 109. Essentially, most of the work this time is a tidy up, as it often is, which is pleasing because it means there are no major issues in the Constitution that we've found thus far through review. If you look at agenda page 109, the first part of that table deals with the articles of the Constitution, which actually themselves together do give an overview of how the council operates. And I've identified a number of areas there that we will need to look at this time round. So I'll just talk the committee through those. In Article 4, the comment there says updating the list of documents which forms the policy framework. So just to explain that, full council is responsible for the budget and policy framework, and then the executive cabinet, in our case, needs to act within that budget and policy framework. So it's really important, is Article 4, in knowing which decisions are to be made by cabinet and which decisions will need to be referred back to full council. In reviewing the list of policy framework documents, we noted that it's quite out of date. Some documents are still there but have new titles, and some documents are not produced anymore. So we will be reviewing Article 4, and that's quite an important piece of work. Article 12 includes the very important this year phrase that the Chief Executive has powers to act where we are in a civil emergency, and we've used those powers on a number of occasions during the pandemic, so we're just going to have a review and make sure that is up to speed, and if we ever in this situation again, what happens in the absence of the Chief Executive, for example? Does it devolve to a corporate director or to the current emergency goal strategic commander? Article 13 is alongside Article 4, and where you've got key decision thresholds, that identifies what is done generally by officers and what is done by cabinet acting collectively. So it's important that that is as clear as it possibly can be. We get more questions about that than anywhere else in governance. Article 15, we're looking at things like the contract procedure rules and some of the financial procedure rules. It's very important that members set the tone and that they set the limits around that. But when it comes to technical amendments, for example, changes in terminology, we think that it might be a good idea to give some technical amendment powers to the Chief Finance Officer in consultation with Cabinet members. The other significant amendment is over the page on the table 110, and that relates to the council procedure rules. Having a look through the rules, there are a number of areas in the rules that provide for opposition group business, for controlling group business, and for discussion items that are never used. So we're going to take the opportunity to tidy that up. And there's been a lot of discussion this year about motions going forward to council and whether they do or don't need to be seconded. The wording is not as clear as it could be, so we will have a look at that aspect as well. I'll also just draw your attention on page 111 to the Officer Employment Procedure Rules. We've already had an update since I wrote this report, so at the bottom of the table it talks about amending the rules so that service directors no longer need a member appointment panel. The view on that has already changed, and so we won't be making that amendment. We won't be proposing that amendment to council. And then under the Members' Code of Conduct, members may be aware that the LGA have done a piece of work, significant piece of work on the Member Code of Conduct, and that has been through Standards Committee, who are recommending that it be approved, and that's the approval of the model code with certain amendments to make it more suitable for Wakefield. So that recommendation from Standards will come forward to full council. As I say, the ultimate decision making on this is at full council, and we will continue to work with the various groups on council and work through the member development group as well, where the group business managers sit, so that we can tidy all of that up and put it forward to full council on the 20th of May. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Fran. There was a question from John Morrison, but I think you've pretty much answered it. It was a question about explanations, justification for these proposed changes. So I wonder perhaps if we could send him an answer direct to him.
Yeah, I'll send him a written answer, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any further questions?
Yes, Chair.
Yeah.
I'm just noting that, as Gillian says, the report sets out an approach for reviewing the Constitution. It doesn't actually give you any amendments that are being put forward, and they'll go to the annual council. I'm just wondering who's going to carry out the review and make those recommendations, because it's got things in there like review the petitions threshold. What input will people have in the review as well?
So to answer that question, I'm responsible for carrying out the review, Councillor Stokes, but I report back on the detail of that to the Leader of Council, but also to the Member Development Group, which includes the group business managers. What we would also aim to do is to have the amendments fully drafted for group meetings ahead of full council, so that groups can see the detail of that and they can determine what their position on those amendments and the detail of the proposal is.
Okay, thanks. Fine.
So if that's no further questions, we agree to accept this report as it is. Thank you. The next item, annual procurement assurance report on agenda page 113, and that is going to be presented to us by Simon Field, I believe.
Yes, that's correct, Chair. Thank you very much. Before I just start talking about the report, I plan to do a similar thing as to many of my counterparts this morning, and just really sort of cover the main points of the report and then sort of take any questions afterwards from the committee. This is the third annual procurement assurance report. The recommendations within the paper are that you note the assurances and controls as laid out in the Council's contract procedure rules, and note the assurances provided by the procurement procedures described in the report. Compliance with the Council's contract procedure rules, for anyone who's unfamiliar with it, they are very much tied into not only the Constitution, but they also ensure compliance with current procurement legislation. The contract procedure rules provide a framework for authorised officers to follow to achieve best value for money with the Council's expenditure, transparency in the procurement process, and also ensure a fair and level playing field which is non-discriminatory to all participating suppliers in the procurement process. Moving on to the background information, as you'll see, this sort of at a top level covers the Council's expenditure in 2020-21, and in total there were 245 individual contracts let worth a total of £124 million. It also outlines and I won't explain it in detail, but the key responsibilities of the procurement service itself. Moving on to the main issues section, this outlines a lot of the sort of challenges and changes in the last 12 months around procurement. Sorry, just one second. it also about the one of the main changes to the procurement process and procedures in the last 12 months has been as a result of the UK leaving the EU, and it outlines the changes that we made to our internal procedures to be in line with the government legislation on procurement. These are highlighted in there, and many of these changes were some which were referenced by Gillian in her previous comments. A lot of them were technical ones around, for instance, where we advertise our procurement opportunities with the council and that kind of thing. So very minor changes at this stage. But moving on to into the main issue section, it also talks about for instance, the government has taken the opportunity as a result of the UK leaving the EU to really have a look at public sector procurement and how it can do things differently moving forward, as we are no longer bound by the European Treaty principles. So it's issued a number of consultation papers. One of them is the Green Paper, which relates to transforming public sector procurement. In summary, and there's a quote on page 116 of your pack, the government's goal from the paper and the proposals that are outlined in it is to speed up and simplify our procurement processes, place value for money at their heart, and unleash opportunities for small businesses, charities and social enterprises to innovate in the public service delivery. Many of the changes that that are outlined are very much in line with modern procurement practices and do outline very much a streamlined process. There's also another consultation paper out, which is the White Paper, which focuses on procurement within the NHS and public health commissioners. It's again on page 117. It's very in line with the Green Paper, and the quote from the DHSC is to remove much of the transactional bureaucracy that has made sensible decision making and collaboration in the system harder. They are very much in line with each other. However, at this stage, as they're only consultation papers, it's very hard to clearly define final implications will be on the council's procurement practices moving forward. There's still a great deal of things which need defining, and clarity needs to be provided in order to understand exactly how this will affect council's contract procedure rules moving forward. The Green Paper, the implications of that and the new legislation for that will come into force in 2022. Whilst the White Paper will be earlier and will be the back end of 2021 when these changes will take effect. There is also, prior to that, in the second quarter of this year, so some time between April through to June, it's expected that the government is going to release a national procurement policy statement, and this will mean that the two major factors in this and significant parts of it are that the council will need to have regard to the procurement policy statement, so issues, etc., and points which are highlighted in it will need to be reflected in the council's contract procedure rules. This means that contract procedure rules will need to be changed in Q2, and amendments may potentially need to be made. The two main points that the National Procurement Policy Statement focuses on are around social value and also the council having to publish its procurement pipeline. What I can say to the committee is that the current council procurement strategy, which went live at the beginning of this year, and also the contract procedure rules, all reflect and already have regard to these two main points, which will be included in a national policy statement. So I don't anticipate that there'll be major or significant changes required by the council to its contract procedure rules or procurement processes. As many of my counterparts and officers have mentioned earlier, COVID has had a significant impact to the council's procurement activity in 2020-21. And it's no surprise that for instance, an impact of this, which is outlined in the report, is around the increase in the use of the council's exception process to the contract procedure rules. In 2020-21, we saw an increase in the use of the exceptions, and 60% of the exceptions were for two main reasons, and understandably so. One was to extend the beyond the current contractual arrangements, and another one was due to urgency and need, whereby which the council was unable to complete a competitive procurement exercise due to the urgency of what needed to be procured. I will say that the government recognised this early on in the pandemic, and in March last year started to issue procurement policy notes, which allowed some flexibility and movement within the current rules and the contract procedure rules and the public contracts regulations. In total, they issued 5 policy notes which directly related to procurement activity relating to it during COVID. A couple of examples I can provide to the committee would be, for instance, the first procurement policy note, which was released by the government back in March last year, which was about responding. It was titled "Responding to COVID-19," and this was around due to urgency and the Regulation 72 within the public contracts regulations, which allows in extreme circumstance to not follow the public contracts regulations and direct award. We looked at this and we used and applied this appropriately to, for instance, in procuring personal protective equipment for the care sector, and this was very similar across the whole region, whereby which we did participate in a large collaborative buy as well with 11 other local authorities from across the north of England. And then another example would be the second procurement policy note, 0220, which was supplier relief due to coronavirus. And this was about ensuring that the supply chain was supported throughout the pandemic, and whereby, for instance, if someone was unable to provide a service, that you could maintain the support or the funding for that supplier while they weren't delivering a full service. We applied this to the home to school transport providers, and this was documented by the procurement team. Moving on, other effects from the due to the pandemic. Going into the pandemic, prior to the pandemic, the council already had a large amount of procurement activity in its pipeline. However, this has been exacerbated during the pandemic as authorised officers in the services that we support, who would normally lead on their own procurements with us supporting them and holding their hands and supporting them through the process, were redirected to support and redeployed to support frontline services, and this has led to a backlog in procurement activity and has increased the amount of activity which needs to take place in the next few months. Also, another issue is and this was mentioned as well by Julie, and I think Councillor Shaw also had a question around this earlier, which was around the amount of resource available. The procurement service is no different to many of the services across the council, and we have a significant resource challenge at the moment. At the point of writing this report, which is now several weeks ago, we had a 42% vacancy rate within the service. What I can say is, since writing this report, this has lowered. We have appointed 2 new officers to the team, and as outlined in the report, we do have a plan in place to mitigate the risk, manage the workload, and appoint officers in the future. And that's really it. Chair, I would like to open it to questions at this point, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you very much, Simon. Graham, did you have a question? Councillor Stokes?
No, Chair, that's from last.
That's the last one. Okay, I'm so sorry. Right,
I've got a brief question, Chair.
Fair enough, Les. Yeah.
Yeah, Simon. Obviously, it looks like things are going to change over next 2 or 3 years. Obviously, there's going to be a lot more flexibility around procurement. Yes.
Yes.
And I just wondered, you know, we have been working, not just as our councils have been working under specific rules, and if there's going to be more flexibility in future and you're looking at resources, are we going to bring in people who have been used to working alongside those flexibility lines?
Yeah, the changes proposed are about simplifying the process, and I would say that reading a lot of what they've discussed and outlined are best practices which are already in place, I would say, many within the private sector. There's things like the government's talked about creating centralised debarment lists and other things like that, simplifying the processes. So currently I think we have 7 procedures that we can follow in terms of carrying out a procurement exercise, and that's going to go down to about 3. So, and those are ones that exist today. So it's going to be, everyone's going to be, and as you pointed out in your question, everyone is going to be in a similar position. I think it's about making sure that you have not highly experienced. You need various levels of experience, but making sure that you've got qualified staff who've got the ability to learn. And I would say that the council has, whilst we are carrying a high level of vacancies in the team, we do look for people with mid to senior roles with the relevant qualifications. And then what we have in place is an apprenticeship style process for the procurement officers, which is the entry level role within the service to develop and learn as they progress. I'm not sure if I've really answered your question, Les. Councillor Shaw.
Oh, thanks a lot. Thanks for that.
Okay, we have one more question from Councillor Nick Stansby. I'm glad to see if you get on, Nick.
Oh, hi, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, great. Sorry, I've had so many issues trying to log on this morning. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I was just concerned. You sort of partly answered my question anyway, but I was just concerned with increased flexibility and the high number of vacancies. I just thought there was quite a risk, really, isn't there? But I mean, you have said that, so I just wondered what steps you were going to take to mitigate the risk of things like I don't know, the Sandal Magna issue.
The Sandal Magna issue, I don't think necessarily I can go into the details of it, and I'll be honest, I don't really have all the details. I know there's an independent inquiry, there's an officer in my team supporting it. I would say that the original procurement for that, for Sandal Magna, predates every single person within the current service. It goes back to, I think, 2005, if I'm correct. So yes, that's something I can't really comment on. What I can say is that we will be developing those processes and any new procedures in line with the best information available. The service itself is part of what we call the Strategic Procurement Group for the Yorkshire and Humber region. So we sit on a group with 26 other heads of procurement from across the region. So we're all working to very similar rules, and what we do talk about is how we're going to implement these new processes so it can be as standardised as possible within our own unique district's requirements or priorities, because obviously a lot of our supplier base across the region is very similar. Other things that the service is doing is we're working very closely with the services to make sure that they're prioritising and helping us prioritise that list of procurement projects appropriately. We are aggregating procurement activity where possible, and that has a benefit as well in terms of economies of scale. And we are looking to, and we are speaking with the YPO, who we're obviously a founding member of, to see where they can support us with our procurement activity as well, because they've got a wealth of procurement experience and expertise there.
Okay, that's reassuring. Thank you.
Okay, there's some comments again from John Morrison, and one is just as simple as, I think it's just a simple typo. On paragraph 710, we refer to make a reference to paragraph 7.3. I think it should be 7.2. Just easy enough to change.
Yeah.
And his other questions are, he mentioned about the danger with vacancies, which you've answered that one, and that's supporting recommendations when the council's contract procedure rules are not appended. Would it be easier if somebody replied directly to him?
Yes. Yeah, I can pick that up. If someone can forward me the questions, I'll pick that up and reply to him.
Yep. Thank you very much. If I could, so are we going to accept this report? Yes, we are. Thank you very much, Simon.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
And the next one is the annual item 14, annual assurance report risk management, pages 123 to 140, and that is Bradley.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. Yeah, so I'm Bradley Frost. I'm the Council's Corporate Risk Manager, and I'm going to briefly go through this item today. So if we could start on the cover paper on page 123 at point 1. The purpose of the report is to provide assurance to this committee that our risk management framework and the associated arrangements are fit for purpose, that they are effectively communicated, and that they are complied with. At point 2 on the same page, I've included the risk management statement itself as Appendix A to the report, and I intend to talk briefly through the key points within the statement. And then finally on the cover paper on page 124 at point 4.2, I've also appended the 4-year risk management strategy, so that's the strategy covering the period 2021 through to 2025. In terms of the statement itself, if I could start by referring members to page 131 and to point 2. Members of this committee may well remember that at the end of 2019 and again in early 2020, we had 2 independent benchmarking exercises undertaken. Following those exercises, a number of suggested areas of best practice were brought to us, and those items are included at table 1 in the report. Just to share with members that, as you can see in the table, the majority of the recommendations have now been implemented, but a number of them remain either ongoing or outstanding. I do believe that COVID has had some impact in terms of implementing these recommendations, and I will touch on that point very briefly later on. On page 132 of the report at point 3, it is the management's opinion that we have effective risk management arrangements in place. That said, I think we also recognise that there are further improvements that we could make to risk management, and those improvements are bulleted at 3.3 on the report. At page 133, I've included a summary table which highlights some of the information that we're now sharing with individual directorates. One of my commitments was that we would have more intelligent and focused reporting on risk management for the directorates to help prioritise the areas that they're looking at. And the table at point 4.4 highlights some of the information that we are now sharing with directorates to help them. And then finally on page 137 at point 6.7 onwards, I think in association with some of the other reports that have been presented, I think it is worth highlighting to members the impact that COVID has had on the risk management arrangements during the last 12 or so months. I think it's worth sharing that there have been some positives. So it's important to recognise that we have refreshed and revised our risk management process just to make sure, A, that we are supporting partnered work in terms of how we are assessing the wider risks within the district. Also, risk management has refocused and it's helped to support some of the key initiatives that the council has undertaken as part of the COVID arrangements. I think it's also worth sharing that there have been a couple of lessons learnt in the last 12 months, and it's about being open and honest with these items. So I've honestly stating that the strategic risk relating to COVID should have been presented to members in a more timely manner, and I've taken that item on board. And if I refer back to table 2 and some of the initiatives that we identified that we were going to try and achieve in the last 12 months, I think it's fair recognition that some of these items have been deferred and will now be delivered during the next financial year. And then on the back of the report, I'll be more than happy to take any questions that members have.
Thank you very much, Bradley. Are there any questions? Okay, no, not from Graham. Right, John Morrison had a question on this, and it's about the overdue reviews of Chief Executive Unit and Regen and Economic Growth in Table 2 on page 133. I think you did sort of answer that.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. What I would just repeat is that I will be open and honest and say during the COVID period, some of our officers who have risks under their ownership were obviously deflected into other areas of working. So there was a slight lag in terms of reviewing risks, and I'm now fully on board with that, and I'm making sure that those risks are now being reviewed and reflected.
Thank you very much. Again, if that could be communicated to John, please.
Yes, I'll make direct contact with John. I'll share that information, and I'll also pick up on the outstanding risk item as well, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think that's it for you. Thanks very much, Bradley.
Thank you, Chair.
And the last item number 15, the Internal Audit Quarter 4 Update Report, pages 141 and 1 to 169. And that will be presented by, excuse me, it's paper going over the place.
Hi Chair, it's Jason. I'll be taking this report forward if that's okay. So thank you, Chair, and good morning everybody. So I'm Jason Brook, the Service Manager for Internal Audit and Risk. So as Chair's already pointed out, the report starts at page 141 of the agenda report pack. Basically, the report sets out work that has been completed by the internal audit team between the 1st of January and the 23rd of March 2021. It's the final quarterly update report for the financial year 2020 to 21, prior to the provision of the annual assurance opinion. As set out in the report, there's two main recommendations at paragraph 2.1, which are for this committee to note that there have been no limitations in scope and nothing has arisen to compromise the independence of the internal audit function, and secondly, to note current performance. The Appendix A to this report provides a summary of the work that has been completed, an update of performance against the revised plan, and analysis of returned client satisfaction questionnaires. I've also provided a summary of the latest position in relation to the annual Head of Internal Audit Assurance opinion, which I'll touch on in a minute. So, as set out on Table 2 on agenda page 147, there were 6 internal audit reports issued during this period. And as can be seen from the opinions, I think these audits provide positive assurance on the robustness of the Council's control environment for these areas. And it also provides assurance that satisfactory progress is being made in relation to the follow-up audit that was undertaken on compliance with the GDPR requirements. Between agenda pages 147 and 150, I've provided a high-level summary of the audit scope or the audit objectives for each of the audits and a summary of the key findings. At the end, obviously, I'll be happy to take any questions that members may have on these particular audits. Section 3 of the appendix details our performance, and at the time of reporting, 52% of the revised plan had been completed. Whilst it's disappointing that we're not as far along as I would have hoped, I think I've got into some detail in paragraph 3.3 as to some of the reasons why we've not been where we need it to be to complete the audit plan. Key one being the filling of vacant posts, despite the use of a specialist recruitment agency. I think the main impact of this that the committee needs to be aware about is set out in paragraphs 3.4 to 3.10, which is how it's going to impact our ability to complete sufficient audit work for the year to provide the annual Head of Internal Audit Assurance opinion. As we first reported to this committee back in November, the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy had issued some guidance on this area for heads of internal audit and included some practical suggestions on how this risk could be mitigated. Set out in paragraph 3.6, which is page 151, the actions that we have taken to implement these suggestions as well as other actions. And I hope that committee sees this as positive assurance that we haven't just sat there and that we have tried to be proactive around providing the annual opinion. The final area which we are continuing to explore is the use of other sources of assurance, and I've provided again a summary of the current position of the table under paragraph 3.8. In summary, at present there is a moderate risk that there may be a limitation of scope in the annual opinion that I'll be providing. If this risk does materialise, CIPFA have provided 3 suggestions as to the wording that could be used, and I've detailed those at paragraph 3.9. My professional opinion at this moment in time is that it would be the wording of the final bullet point that would have to be used, and that's on the basis that there are some gaps in the areas of coverage, but it's nothing of significance in terms of just one area. So we've got good coverage in terms of key financial systems. We cover risk management as part of all our audits that we undertake, and there is some coverage around governance. Areas that I would have liked a little bit more assurance on relate to decision making, procurement, and directorate specific risk management, as can be seen through the tables. So what I'm intending to do is take further stock of this before I make the annual opinion report later on in the next municipal year, and I'll probably provide an update to members outside of the committee process if required as to the latest thinkings. The final part of the report sets out the results of return client satisfaction questionnaires. So out of a maximum score of 4 for each CSQ, our average is 3.5, and I think given the current home working arrangements, I see this as quite positive, although I would prefer for a greater number of CSQ returns, so that's something that I'll take up with individual directorates. And finally, in Appendix B, which starts on agenda page 156, I provided a summary of all the ongoing work that we've got against the revised internal audit plan. I've also added an additional column that sets out where the expected status will be in time for the annual audit opinion, and this really corresponds to the issues that I've already discussed around the risks of delivering this annual Head of Internal Audit Assurance opinion. I mean, those are kind of the key points that I wanted to get across, Chair and Committee, but obviously I'm happy to take any questions that anybody might have.
Thank you very much, Bradley. Yes, Graham has a question.
Thank you, Chair. I think problems with vacancies seems to have been a theme at today's meeting. particularly procurement and audit. Audit teams seem to have a national vacancy problem at the moment. It seems to be happening everywhere. And I know from this report that only 52.2% of the scheduled plan has been undertaken due to vacancies. That's despite mitigation measures being taken. I just wonder, is it going to continue to be a problem in the future? And are there any implications that we need to be aware of? And does this leave us open to risk from the unaudited areas?
Thank you, Councillor. Very good questions. Obviously, we've tried everything that we possibly can, including the use of a specialist recruitment agency to getting people of the required skills and experience really for their positions. Work's going to continue in that area. I'll use the ongoing update reports to make committee aware of any issues and how we're going in terms of filling those posts. One of the things that I'm going to do after this meeting is have another meeting with my principal audit manager, Julie, who presented the draft audit plan for the current financial year. And we'll look at exploring ways that we might go about filling posts and whether there might be a potential to change some of the posts. So, for example, as Councillor Shaw had raised, possibilities around utilising the apprenticeship levy. So one of the things that we could do potentially is have a post in place where people are brought in at a lower level, but then they go to a higher level on completion of various qualifications. So that might be a longer term thing, but it doesn't unfortunately resolve the short term issue, which is we've really got a gap at audit manager level, which is what's needed really for the review process to make sure that the audits are evidence-based, objective, and all that kind of thing. So that has to be our key focus going forward, Councillor. And like I said, I'll keep you updated as to how that's going. So I hope that answers your question in a roundabout way.
Yeah, okay, that's fine, thanks.
Thank you, Bradley. Yes, John Morrison had a similar type of question, but it is more or less been asked by Graham and Councillor Stokes. But again, I'll let you have his question so you can reply directly if you feel that's appropriate.
I'll do that, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. And so I think we're going to accept this report and its recommendations. And I'd like to thank you very much because, you know, there's an awful lot of work goes into these things. They don't write themselves, sadly. And thank you very much for that. Most of it looks very, very good. Just a few bits. So, is there any need to go on to Appendix C?
Again, I'm happy to take any questions that there might be, Chair, on that appendix.
Well, are there any questions on Appendix C?
Can we ask?